Hi, today we are going to do a review on the Maestro MyWeigh Scale. And what better way to do a review than to make some bread. First of all, here's the scale. So the first thing we're going to want to do is open up the box, obviously. We have some instructions here. And as we can see, there's going to be some assembly required. Okay, I got some batteries here, and I want to show you basically how to put these batteries in. There's a flat side of the battery, and that goes against the spring. And there's your batteries. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is put the top on. If you notice, there's pins here on the top, and there's holes on the top of the scale. All you have to do is fit the pins into the holes and push it down gently. Next thing we want to do is turn on the scale. In order to do that, we push the little red circle with a line through it called tare. Press it once and you'll see a countdown on the screen there. Right now it's trying to measure in kilograms. On the bottom it says grams on top. To turn off, we just press and hold, tare, and the unit turns off. Okay, so now we're weighing something. We got our basically our mixing bowl here, and according to the bottom part here, it says it weighs 0.513 kilogram. If we push the mode button, we get 1.13 pounds, 18.1 ounces. There's the ounces right there. 1.2. I don't know what this says. One looks like the time here, but it says a 2.1, oh, pounds, ounces. 1 pound, 2.1 ounces, and back to kilogram again. Now, I don't want to weigh my mixing bowl. I want to weigh the stuff that goes inside the mixing bowl. So in order to accomplish that, I push the tare button, and it zeroes out the display. Now we're ready to put our ingredients in. Well, as I promised you, we would do our review today by making a loaf of bread. And what we have down below here are the ingredients for making the bread. So first thing I want to show you is the mother, which has been freshly fed, and it's all, you can see, it's all bubbly. We got some salt, and we have some flour. Now I don't have any water in these ingredients because I'm making a rather special bread recipe where I'm going to take my starter, and all I'm going to do is add just enough flour to make some dough, because this is going to be a very simple bread recipe. I'm going to make a very small loaf, and we're actually going to cook it in the toaster oven. Okay, so coming back to the scale after I was talking a little bit, we'll notice here that the power has turned off. The reason for that is because since we're running on batteries, the scale is trying to conserve the batteries, and it turns itself off automatically. So if you're going to be doing some measurements and you plan on taking your time doing those measurements, you probably don't want to go be using the batteries. You want to go ahead and plug in the power supply and run it that way. Since I haven't used this scale before, I really haven't developed any recipes that use grams. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and start off with a conventional recipe. The first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to stir down my starter, or my mother, because it's full of air bubbles. For one thing, I don't want it overflowing. And the other thing is that if I pour the starter into the measuring cup while it's full of air bubbles, I won't get an accurate measurement here. So as you can see now, it's stirred down quite a bit. I'm going to go ahead and put 2/3 cup into the measuring cup. And now we're going to use our scale here. I'm going to remove the my mixer first. Turn the power on. We're going to let it count down. Put my, you notice it still says 0.512 kilogram. I'm going to clear it out. And now for the sake of developing my recipe, I'm going to go ahead and put this into the mixing bowl. My hands are clean. Just hold right there. I get a little bit now. If we note down here, I have 167 grams of starter. So if I wanted to create a recipe using this technique, then what I would do, if I wanted to create a recipe using this technique, then what I would do is I would put in the recipe, I would say 167 grams of starter. Also, if you're going to use starter, you need to know something about the amount of water in your starter. It's called the hydration level. I don't know what the hydration level of my starter is, but it's of the kind of the consistency of maybe a little thicker than a pancake dough here. All right. And so next thing you need to do, so 167 probably wouldn't be a nice a number to use for a recipe. So I might want to say something like 200 grams of starter for the real recipe. In fact, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and call it 200 grams of starter. I'm going to go ahead and add some more starter in here. And just to see how easy it is to bump it up. Adding a little more. 193. It's probably close enough because I don't think anyone's ever going to get it exactly on the dot. And there's 201 grams of starter. I'm going to go ahead and wash my measuring cup and I'll be right back. Okay, well, the next thing that I would normally do for a recipe like this is add some salt. In this size of recipe, I will usually add from 1/4 teaspoon to half a teaspoon of salt. But what we have to do is figure out what that would weigh in grams because we're trying to create a gram-based recipe here. Now, if I'm turning the power on again here because the power went off, you just have to bear with me for a second. I'm going to go ahead and zero this out by hitting the tare. So now I got 0 again. And if I add something very, very light, like say this measuring thing, as you can see, it's not even recording, it's not even showing the weight of this measuring spoon here. That's because the resolution is in grams. This thing doesn't even weigh a gram. So here's where the instrument gets very interesting here. On the side here we have another scale. It's a miniature scale for measuring much lighter items. Now I have to pull this off temporarily so I can get to it. You're going to find out that it's rather difficult to pull out. It has it's like it's clicked in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull with my fingers and push on the frame. Okay. Now I'll pull this out. This is my first time, so please bear with me. Now I'm going to go ahead and put this back on. And if you notice, nothing's changed up here. The reason for that is because as soon as you pull the side scale out, the display will automatically start weighing whatever is on this particular scale. And it says, I don't know, like 71 grams because I pressed down it with my hand. So I'm going to go ahead and clear that out. I'm going to go ahead and add a little measuring container here to measure my salt. I can't pour the salt on the scale itself, right? And so my little measuring cup here says it weighs 18.1 grams. Okay, I'm going to clear that. And now we're going to add some salt. So I want to add a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, but I don't know what that weighs in grams. So let's go ahead and just put 1/4 teaspoon of salt in here to start off with. And I've got here 1.6 grams of salt. So maybe for my recipe I would say 2 grams of salt. So what I'm going to do now is just going to sprinkle a little more salt in there. Hopefully we're zoomed in on the scale here so we can see. And there's 2.1 grams of salt that I've added to my measuring cup here now. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead And I'm going to close this. I'll wait for the camera to get back up to the zoom, to the proper zoom here. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and do is close this, and what we're going to find out is that the scale is going to go back to this part, and I'm going to tear that out so it says 0. And just for illustrative purposes, I'm going to go ahead and add the salt. Now I know I have 2 grams of salt here. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is add my 2 grams of salt to the main bowl. And the idea is that we want to see what the main scale does with that 2 grams. Okay? So I'm going to add a little salt here. I'm adding salt. I've added a little bit of salt, and it doesn't even register anything on this particular scale here. That's because this is a more coarse scale and it can't measure fine measurements. I'm going to add a little more salt. Adding more salt. And there I've added 2 grams of salt. Now that I'm scraping out the container here, this is showing me 3 grams, and it went from 3 to 4 to 5 grams. I don't think that you want to be weighing your salt on the Master platform here, but the little small platform that is much more precise is perfect for weighing the salt. So I'm going to go ahead and using my spoon over here that I got from the mother, I'm going to go ahead and stir my salt in. I don't need the scale now. Go ahead and stir my salt in. Now that my salt is stirred in, I'm going to go ahead and add some flour. And as I said, this is a brand new recipe, and so I don't really know how much flour to add. All right? So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead, remove my spoon here. I'm going to go ahead, and I got this thing teared out now, okay? And I'm going to add some flour and start mixing it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 1/4 of a cup of flour at a time. And that way I can determine at what point I have the right amount of flour for this recipe. So the question to ask obviously right now is how much does 1/4 of a cup of flour weigh in grams? So I'm going to go ahead and add the cup, 1/4 cup. And as you can see down here, I got 43 grams of flour. So most likely in my recipe, if this was the proper amount, I would simply say put in 40 grams of flour, for example. I'm going to go ahead and remove this because I don't want to damage my scale as I mix the ingredients here. So now I'm mixing. I've got my 200 grams, if you recall, of starter. I have my 40 grams, more or less, of flour. I got my 2 grams of salt. And as you can see, I have a dough consistency that's pretty wet, but it's manageable. Again, my hands have been washed previously. And let's see how this comes out in the mixing stand. Okay, so I have my dough here now, and I'm going to go ahead and run it in the stand mixer. The dough looks a little bit too wet, to tell you the truth, so I'm going to have to add some flour. I don't know how much flour I'm going to add yet, but I do know that my 1/4 of cup flour that I've been weighing today is about 40 grams of flour. And so what I can do is go ahead at this point and put in flour, maybe not 1/4 cup at a time, but I'm going to use the 1/4 cup measuring. If I add half of this, then I know I need 1/8 cup more of flour for this particular recipe. Obviously that would be 20 grams. So getting this guy started, I'm going to start mixing. If we look inside here, it's pretty clear to see that this dough is pretty wet. And we can mix this for a long time. Now I have a tiny little bit of dough in here, And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to rotate this so that the hook is allowed to go a little deeper into the bowl. And if I tighten it down, the hook would be just a little bit higher in there. If we look again here, it's very clear that our dough is very wet, and this is going to be a very difficult dough to work with. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add probably this full 1/4 cup of flour here. Now, if I wanted to measure this extra flour on the scale, I have to get another container and measure it. But the purpose here is to develop a recipe in gram scale and not continuously going back and forth to the scale. I know this is 40 grams, and so I'm good with that. So I'm going to go ahead and dump this in here. And you can come up and take a look if you like. So here it is. I went and go ahead and put in the full 1/4 cup. So now I have a total of, say, 80 grams of flour. So if you want to stay right there on that, I'll come right back with my tool. I like to help my dough out a little bit by pressing the side walls down. Be careful if you do this. Don't do this, I guess, unless you really know what you're doing. As you can see, I'm causing problems for myself. Okay. Looking inside here again, it looks like we have added too much flour. And now the dough is looking very dry. I'm going to go ahead and cheat. And I'm going to add a tiny little bit of bottled water to my mix. And very much. I know now in the recipe to go ahead and in my recipe now, rather than saying add 80 grams of flour, I'd probably say more like 65 or 70 grams of flour. That way I wouldn't have to go in or add water to the mix. The important thing about bread making, though, is that you don't follow the recipe exactly anyhow. What you want to do is have a good feel for what your dough is going to look like when you're all done. So let's take a look at our dough. As we can see now, our dough is fairly attached to the hook. I'm going to go ahead and stop it and pull it up. You want to have clean hands, of course, but you want to handle your dough a little bit. And the reason that you want to handle your dough is so you get a feeling of the consistency of the dough. So when I look at this dough here right now, for one thing, it's very sticky. Okay. And but this is the kind of the consistency I'm looking for here. I could add more flour so it's not sticky, but as I add more flour, what you're going to find out is that your dough is going to get too dry and your bread won't come out the way that you want it. In the kneading process, we're going to develop the gluten here, and you're going to find out that after we mix it for a few minutes, that it's going to become less sticky and it's going to handle much better. So let's go ahead and mix it. I just want to give you a little a sneak peek here of what's going on inside the mixer. We're about 2 minutes into it right now. I'm going to go ahead and pull my lock knob forward here so this thing doesn't pop up, although with this tiny bit of dough it wouldn't really be a problem. You notice that the dough is not getting stuck on the dough hook anymore. I like that. At the same time, the dough is not really sticking to the pan either. If the dough does get stuck onto the hook and it just starts spinning, then I'll simply stop the machine and pull the dough off the hook again. Okay, well, we have our Our dough now has been kneading in the stand mixer for about, I don't know, 5-6 minutes here. And it's still pretty sticky here. I'm going to go ahead now and put a little flour on the table. And let's play with it a little bit and kind of see what the consistency is. I want to find out where this is too wet. Now you can see it's already starting to stick to my hands. So what I want to do is just sprinkle a little flour on top of it. Okay. Now with a little flour on top, it's not sticking so much, and it's absorbing the flour on the bottom. I can kind of pull this flour a little bit. Don't be afraid to add a little more flour if you need to for handling. What I want to do is I want to stretch my flour, okay, to about 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch thick here, okay, and as you can see, it's starting to tear here a little bit, but in the middle here, the flour is about 1/8 of an inch thick, and it's not tearing on me, and it feels rather rubbery here, okay. So I'm going to go ahead and get this guy ready to go into the bowl. What I want to do is form just a nice ball so that okay, when it expands, it's going to hold all those gases in there. Don't have to do that. Really don't have to do that right now because this is the first rise. But if you want to practice a little bit with your bread forming technique, if you want to make a roll, you'll stretch, fold in, stretch and fold in. Okay, that makes a nice surface. And one of the reasons I do this is I want to make sure that I get this nice surface here. Because if I don't get this nice surface here, then that means that my bread hasn't been kneaded long enough. Sometimes, especially when I work with notice how I press down, it springs right back. That tells me that it has a lot of resilience in there. This is a good thing. Sometimes when I'm working with, say, whole wheat flours, maybe I want to put a little masa flour in my bread. So as soon as you start stretching it, it simply falls apart. And so what I want to do is I want to knead it a little bit longer to develop the gluten. Remember, you have a mixture of flour and a non-gluten or low gluten flour. The low gluten flour isn't going to contribute much to the gluten process, and so you have to mix it, knead it a little bit longer so that the little bit of white flour that you do have can really develop this gluten very well. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of olive oil. I like to use olive oil. Got a little glass bowl here. I'm going to put this in upside down first, get a little bit of oil on the top, and then I'm going to flip it around. And I like pressing it down. The reason I like to press it down, so it's kind of pressed down like this, is so that the idea later on is that this is going to double in size for the first rise. And I want to be able to know that it's doubled in size. And sometimes if it's not touching the sides of the container, you look in there and you're just like, oh, it's the same, it hasn't risen upward, but maybe it's risen sideways. So I want to pretty much pat this down and just hold a second. Throw my paper towels on the other side of the kitchen here, and now what I'm going to do is go ahead and cover this. The idea is that we don't want drafts on the dough. I don't know why, but this is what I've been told. And now we're going to wait for my particular starter that I have. This is going to take about 2 hours to double in size. I know you're thinking this is the same as commercial yeast. I have a very active starter. For one thing, we didn't really use any water. We just put the starter and flour together. So I got a lot of yeast in my starter, and I got a lot of yeast in this dough. And I would say between maybe even up to within an hour, this thing is going to double in size, and we're going to be ready to punch it down and form the final loaf. Okay, so here we are. We're 2 hours later. Actually, I got delayed a little bit, and I wound up being 3 hours later. But as you can see, It's actually more than doubled in size. I probably should have punched this down a little sooner, but it is as it is. So I'm going to go ahead and flour this up, and we're going to take a look at this. As you notice, it's very, has like all these little air bubbles inside there, right? Look at that. It's like it's making its bread right here on the counter. Of course, we have to cook it. There's a lot of air bubbles in there. And the other thing I notice here is that this is very soft. It's much softer than it was when we first put it in the bowl. Okay, not only is it softer, but when I start stretching it, look, right here you can almost see through it, and it's not breaking right there. Okay, there it's just made a little hole. Well, making a hole over here because my finger went through. Now talking about right here, it's very, very thin, and only now are you being able to see some holes coming through. This is also very wet. Okay, so what I want to do is handle it rather quickly. The longer my hands are in contact with this thing, the more likely that my hands will start sticking. I don't have a problem right now with this thing sticking to the table. I'm going to try to make it stick to the table. I can't even make it stick to the table, but just to hold it in a second. If it were to stick to the table, I would use this instrument and scrape it off the table. As you can see, I have very little flour here. Okay. So what I'll do is basically flatten this guy out. Okay. Now I'm going to form a loaf, and I'm going to go ahead and pull, fold, pull the ends in, okay, pull and roll, okay. Now remember, I started off with a tiny little bit of dough here, okay, so there is maybe a little miniature little baguette I got going here, okay? That's one way. Remember, this is going to go into the toaster oven. I'm not going to put this in the main oven. I don't want to have to heat my whole oven to cook a little tiny piece. This is like a snack for myself, okay? The other thing I can do is go ahead, flatten it out again, okay? And do as I did earlier. I'll go more in a circular motion, okay? Remember, this is what I was showing you earlier, okay? Notice the bottom always looks a little ugly. You always see the little seam on the bottom. You can kind of pinch that closed if you want. Okay? The most important thing here is that when this bread rises, you have a nice, it's like a skin on this dough. And that one, it looks nice, but also because the gluten has developed as the yeast continues, because it will continue to consume the sugars and the flour or the starches. It actually takes the starches and converts them to sugars. It will continue to produce a carbon dioxide gas, and this will rise again. Okay, and so basically this is one way I could put it, to cook it later on. I don't want to do it this way, and the reason for that is because it's going to rise up too high, and it's going to contact the coils in my toaster oven. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my original shape here. In fact, for that matter, if I wanted to, there, I got flatbread, right? I could cook this in the frying pan if I want to have a quick meal here, all right? So I'm going to go ahead. And the reason I'm pushing on this is I want to remove any kind of tears or anything that are in the dough. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fold this and go back to my original shape. Just like a little miniature baguette. Okay. The little technique I use, just kind of rolling it. Just kind of make it pretty, all right? And I've kind of flattened it, if you notice, and the reason that I've kind of flattened it is, again, because I don't want it to rise too high in the toaster oven. So there you go, we have that. And I'm going to set this on a little plate, and we'll let it rise for another hour or so, and then we'll cook it up and see what happens. Okay, we are ready now with our final loaf. I'm not sure if you remember earlier, we mixed the dough and then we put it in a container, and the idea was to let it rise for a couple hours, and during that time it more than doubled in size. And so we punched it down and we formed the loaf in several different ways. We finally decided that we would kind of leave it as a baguette type of loaf, and now we have let it set out for another couple hours, and as you can see, it has doubled in size, if not more, all over again. So I have my preview oven here. This is not your ordinary toaster oven for just toasting slices of bread or your Pop-Tarts. I can actually cook a smaller loaf of bread in this oven. This is a, I guess, top of the line type of toaster oven. So if you look over here, I have it in bake mode. I have it set to, right now it defaults to 350 degrees. I'm going to go ahead and crank that up to 380 degrees. Press the button here. It says 9 minutes. I'm going to need probably at least 15 minutes to start. And we'll start preheating. Well, okay, we have the bread here. It's a nice golden brown color over here. As you can see, we're cooking it in the toaster oven. Now, because we're cooking in the toaster oven, it may not be uniformly brown. And so what I want to do is just very carefully, it's kind of hot. See if I can do this. Flip this guy over. Okay. I can even put it on top of the, you know, the dough can't fall through the rack here, but I'm just going to go ahead and put on the tin foil. And the bottom is rather white still, okay? Part of that's because I'm cooking on tin foil rather than cooking on a real bread pan here. I got to be careful that I don't touch the bread is very close to the burners over here. Okay, and we'll let it go for another 3 minutes or so. We'll let it go for another 3 minutes or so here while we're doing our recap on our scale over here. So, this is the Maestro MyWeigh scale. This was purchased through a company called A Savings. And the website where you can go ahead and purchase this scale is Amazon.com. So, to recap, the only thing that I was rather unhappy about with this scale is that the instructions clearly say that they include a battery, and there was no battery included with the scale. Other than that, what I like about this scale is that it has the main surface on top. It also has the little, well, I guess I can call this the little microscale on the side over here. Remember that the main scale is for weighing the, like, you know, your dough. Maybe if you want to do soups and stuff like that, you weigh the main ingredients, carrots or whatever. Not that I would want to weigh my carrots, but maybe you would want to if you're following a particular recipe. Well, the smaller scale is probably 5 grams and less. Your salts and your spices and stuff, you might want to weigh on this side. And but I would say that basically we've been very happy with this scale, and we're going to do a lot more bread making and hope to see you soon. Okay, well, no bread making recipe would be complete without actually trying the bread, right? So let's do that. I guess I turn my oven off. Let's see how this guy came out. I don't want to burn myself. Now we're supposed to wait until the bread is cooled somewhat, obviously, but I'm a little bit in a hurry here, so I'm going to go ahead and try some. Let's see how it is. Ouch. It's a little crunchy on the outside. A nice soft crumb on the inside. Well, let's see how it tastes. It's a little hot, so I'm going to be careful here. It's good.